Hi everybody, my name is Ethan and my presentation today is on felon disenfranchisement. So what exactly is felon disenfranchisement? It's removing the rights of people to vote. So felon disenfranchisement means removing the rights of felons to vote. And I feel removing the rights of American citizens to vote is a major problem in the United States. And since most felons are actually people of color, I feel it is systematically racist as well. So a quick history on felon disenfranchisement. When America was first colonized, the colonists brought the idea of civil death with them from Europe. Civil death being the idea of removing someone's rights after they commit a crime, which included voting. So after the American Revolution, more states adopted this idea of felon disenfranchisement into their constitutions. So by the end of the Civil War, about 29 different states had some sort of felon disenfranchisement. And because of this, they made it a lot easier to lose their rights. In Missouri, you could actually lose your rights to vote for arson, burglary, and theft, but for some reason not for murder. And the idea was behind this is because they believe that African Americans were more likely to commit arson, burglary, theft over murder, thus removing their rights would be a lot easier. So, and also a lawmaker in 1901 in Alabama said that to ensure white supremacy over the state, they had to use the law instead of taking it by force, referring to the idea of felon disenfranchisement. So felon disenfranchisement actually fell during the civil rights era. However, once the war on drugs started and we started doing more mass incarcerations, because of that, the amount of disenfranchised voters actually rose. So some quick facts about felon disenfranchisement. About 5 million Americans are disenfranchised, not allowed to vote. And 2.2 million of those are African Americans, meaning African Americans are the most disenfranchised population in the United States. About 1 in 16 African Americans are not allowed to vote, even though they are American citizens, because they committed a felony. And the weird part about that is most states actually differ on when someone can regain their right to vote. Some states it would be after you serve your prison sentence, others just after your probation period ends, and others you have to jump through different hurdles just to be able to vote again. The 14th Amendment states that all free men are allowed to vote. However, in section 2 of that amendment, it says that if someone commits an act of rebellion or another crime, they can have their right to vote removed. And this case was actually argued in the case of Richardson versus Ramirez, where the three men tried to get their right to vote back, even though they committed felony. And the Supreme Court stated because of that specific clause, they weren't allowed to get their right to vote back. So one of the most restrictive states for felon disenfranchisement is actually Florida. In Florida, after you are released from prison, you have to wait 5 to 7 years just to submit an application to appeal to get your voting rights back. After that, a board reviews your application, and you have to go to Tallahassee, the capital, where you will argue your case to a council, and they will decide whether or not you can gain your right to vote back. The problem with this is there are no specific rules that the council has to follow in order to get someone's right back, so it is purely at their own discretion. So they could deny for any reason. In some of the depositions that I watched, some were denied their rights to vote just because they had a parking ticket since they got out. And one of the council members' most frequent questions was asking people whether they went to church or not, which I feel is against the Constitution to ask that. And in 2019, the governor passed a new law saying that if you want to get your voting rights back, you have to go through all that, and you have to pay what is essentially a poll tax to get your voting rights back. And the issue with that is most felons in the state are actually living at or below the poverty line. And not only that, most disenfranchised people in Florida are African Americans. So about 1 in 5 African Americans there cannot vote, which I feel is completely unfair. So there are large consequences for disenfranchising such a large group of people. People who are disenfranchised, their kids are less likely to be interested in politics. Thus, the voter turnout will be a lot less because of a younger generation having a disinterest in politics, meaning that young people who could have swayed elections didn't vote. Convicted people are also a lot less likely to vote because they had their voting rights once taken away, as well as if they get their voting rights back, they're more likely to integrate back into society and not recommit crimes. Also, the amount of disenfranchised people can easily sway an election. Most famously in the year 2000, during Al Gore versus George Bush, Bush famously won Florida by a margin of only 500 votes. If disenfranchised people were allowed to vote in Florida during that time, they could have most likely swayed that election in Al Gore's favor. So what are some arguments for voter disenfranchisement? The main argument that I have heard is that people who commit crimes must face the consequences for their actions. However, I would argue that they have already faced the consequences of their actions by going to prison and serving their time. Once they get out, that is the government saying, yep, you have faced the consequences of your actions. But since these people, they pay taxes, they want to support their family, they are American citizens, why are we denying their right to vote? Another argument that I have heard is that we don't want dangerous people voting in elections and deciding things. However, only 18% of all felonies in the United States are violent felonies. Most felonies are property crimes and drug crimes. So the argument that dangerous people voting in elections is just completely wrong. So what can be done to reverse this? Well, one main thing that can be done to reverse this is having a set law around the whole United States on when people can gain their voting rights back. And I believe when someone should get their voting rights back is once they complete their prison sentence, because as I said before, that is the end of their punishment, so then they should be allowed to vote. And also revising which felonies can cause you to lose your voting rights. In some states, theft and burglary can get you your voting rights revoked, even though that's not that serious of a crime, such as arson, murder, treason, which with those you can also get your voting rights removed. In the case of murder and treason, you get your voting rights removed forever. And that is the end of my presentation. Thank you for listening, and I hope to see you all soon.